Emily had always believed that hard work could solve almost anything. Growing up, she wasn't the favorite child, but she convinced herself that if she worked hard enough, loved deeply enough, and sacrificed enough, eventually her parents would see her value. While other teenagers spent their weekends with friends, Emily worked part-time jobs. She stocked shelves at grocery stores, cleaned offices after school, and tutored younger students for extra money. Every dollar she earned had a purpose. She dreamed of creating a secure future for herself because she had learned early that nobody else was going to build it for her. Her younger brother Jason lived a completely different life. Charming and carefree, he was the center of their parents' world. If Jason wanted a new phone, he got one. If he wanted expensive clothes, their parents found a way to buy them. When he made mistakes, they called it youthful freedom. When Emily made even the smallest mistake, she was criticized and reminded to be more responsible. Over time, she stopped expecting fairness. Instead, she focused on building her own success. After college, she worked harder than ever. She accepted long hours, took difficult projects, and often stayed at the office long after everyone else had gone home. While her friends traveled and enjoyed their weekends, Emily worked. She wasn't trying to become rich. She simply wanted stability. She wanted something nobody could take away from her. Years passed, and her sacrifices slowly paid off. She earned promotions, increased her savings, and eventually started a successful consulting business. There were nights when she slept only a few hours because she was juggling multiple clients. There were moments when she questioned whether all the effort was worth it. Yet every time she looked at her growing savings account, she reminded herself of her goal. Then came the day she never thought she would see. At 32 years old, Emily bought a house. It wasn't a mansion, but to her it felt like a palace. The moment she received the keys, tears filled her eyes. She walked from room to room, touching the walls and imagining the life she would build there. Every corner represented years of sacrifice. Every room reminded her of the dreams she had postponed. She painted the walls herself, planted flowers in the garden, and carefully selected furniture. For the first time in her life, she felt truly safe. The house became more than a place to live. It became a symbol of everything she had achieved despite the lack of support from her family. Her parents visited occasionally and praised the house, but even then Emily noticed something strange. They often talked about how useful the property could be for the family. They joked about borrowing money against it or using it to help Jason someday. Emily laughed off those comments, assuming they were harmless. She trusted her family, even when experience suggested she shouldn't. Meanwhile, Jason continued drifting through life without direction. He changed jobs constantly, spent money recklessly, and seemed more interested in social media than building a career. Whenever he faced financial trouble, their parents rushed to rescue him. Emily often found herself helping too. She paid for unexpected expenses, covered emergency bills, and even loaned Jason money that was never repaid. Each time she told herself family was more important than money. She wanted to believe that kindness mattered. Unfortunately, her generosity only encouraged their behavior. The more she gave, the more they expected. One afternoon, her father called asking for help with a medical bill. Emily immediately transferred the money without hesitation. A few weeks later, her mother needed assistance covering household expenses. Emily helped again. Then Jason claimed he was struggling to pay rent. Once more, she stepped in. By the end of the year, she had contributed thousands of dollars to family needs. Not once did anyone ask how these constant demands affected her own finances. Not once did anyone thank her properly, yet she continued helping because she loved them. Deep down, she still hoped they would eventually appreciate her sacrifices. Then Jason developed a new obsession. He wanted to travel across Europe. He spent hours talking about luxury hotels, famous landmarks, expensive restaurants, and beach resorts. Every family gathering became a presentation about his dream vacation. The problem was obvious. Jason couldn't afford any of it. He barely managed his monthly expenses. Most people would have adjusted their plans. Jason simply assumed someone else would pay. Their parents quickly became determined to make his dream come true. They spoke about how life was short and how Jason deserved happiness. Emily listened politely but felt frustrated. She couldn't understand why they treated a luxury vacation like a necessity. Whenever she suggested Jason save money himself, her parents accused her of being unsupportive. The conversations became increasingly uncomfortable. Still, Emily tried to stay out of it. She focused on her business and continued improving her house. Then small warning signs began appearing. Her parents suddenly asked unusual questions about property paperwork. They seemed interested in details they had never cared about before. Her mother asked where she kept important documents. Her father casually mentioned real estate values in the neighborhood. At the time, Emily dismissed these conversations as harmless curiosity. She had no reason to suspect anything darker. Several months later, a major client invited Emily to attend an important conference in another city. The opportunity could significantly expand her business, so she accepted. Before leaving, she spent a pleasant evening at home, watering her flowers and enjoying the peaceful environment she had worked so hard to create. As she sat on her patio watching the sunset, she felt proud of herself. Life wasn't perfect, but she had built something meaningful through determination and sacrifice. The conference lasted 4 days. During that time, Emily remained busy with meetings, presentations, and networking events. Her phone occasionally buzzed with messages from family members, but nothing seemed unusual. Jason sent pictures of travel destinations he hoped to visit someday. Her parents asked routine questions about her trip. Everything appeared normal. On the morning of her return, she felt excited to go home. She imagined relaxing on her couch, sleeping in her own bed, and enjoying a quiet weekend. However, the moment she pulled into her driveway, something felt wrong. A strange car was parked outside. Several unfamiliar people stood near the entrance. Confused, Emily approached the house. One of the strangers smiled politely and asked if she needed help. Emily explained that she lived there. The man's expression immediately changed. He informed her that the property had recently been sold and legally transferred to its new owners. At first, Emily thought it was some kind of misunderstanding. She laughed nervously and explained again that she owned the house. The stranger looked uncomfortable and showed her paperwork indicating the sale had already been completed. Emily stared at the documents in disbelief. Her hands began shaking. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear anything else. None of it made sense. She rushed back to her car and immediately drove to her parents' home. Throughout the drive, she desperately searched for a logical explanation. Maybe there had been a clerical error, maybe someone had committed fraud, maybe there was some misunderstanding that could be fixed. The moment she entered her parents' house, she noticed an unusual silence. Her mother looked nervous. Her father avoided eye contact. Jason sat on the couch with a grin he seemed unable to hide. Fear settled heavily in Emily's chest. She asked a simple question. What happened? Nobody answered immediately. Finally, her mother took a deep breath and explained that they had sold the house. She spoke as if discussing a minor inconvenience rather than a life-changing betrayal. According to her parents, the decision had been necessary for the family. Jason needed an opportunity to enjoy life, and they believed the house represented the family's greatest asset. Emily stared at them, unable to process the words. Her father insisted they had done what was best. Her mother claimed Emily would recover financially because she was successful. Jason casually mentioned how amazing Europe was going to be. Each sentence felt like another knife twisting deeper into her heart. The house she had spent years building toward was gone. The place filled with memories, sacrifices, and dreams had been taken from her. Worse still, the people responsible were sitting directly in front of her. She expected to feel rage. She expected to scream or cry. Instead, an eerie calm settled over her. As her family continued justifying their actions, Emily listened quietly. Something inside her changed in that moment. Years of disappointment, favoritism, and betrayal suddenly became crystal clear. She finally understood that no amount of sacrifice would ever make them value her the way they valued Jason. The realization hurt more than the loss of the house itself. Then, to everyone's surprise, Emily smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't a forgiving smile. It was the smile of someone who had just stopped believing a lie she had spent her entire life trying to defend. Her parents seemed relieved when they saw it. Jason laughed and assumed she had accepted defeat. None of them noticed the determination behind her eyes. None of them understood that the daughter they had underestimated for years was already thinking several steps ahead. And none of them knew that this betrayal would become the biggest mistake they had ever made. The days following the shocking revelation felt unreal to Emily. Every morning she woke up hoping she had imagined everything, only to remember the painful truth seconds later. The house she had worked for, sacrificed for, and dreamed about for years was gone. What hurt even more was not the financial loss, but the fact that her own family had been responsible. She had always known her parents favored Jason, but she never believed they would cross a line this severe. Yet as the days passed, their behavior made it clear they felt little guilt. Instead of apologizing, they acted as if Emily was the one creating a problem. Whenever she tried to discuss what had happened, they immediately changed the subject or accused her of being selfish. Her mother constantly repeated that family should support each other. Her father insisted that money and property were less important than family happiness. Jason, meanwhile, behaved as though he had won a prize he rightfully deserved. The more Emily watched them, the more she realized they genuinely believed their actions were justified. It was as if years of her sacrifices meant absolutely nothing compared to Jason's latest desire. Within a week, Jason had transformed into a travel expert. Every conversation revolved around Europe. He talked endlessly about luxury hotels, famous restaurants, expensive beaches, and exclusive experiences he planned to enjoy. His social media pages became a non-stop stream of countdown posts. He uploaded photographs of tourist attractions and wrote captions about finally living his dream. Friends congratulated him. Relatives liked and shared his posts. Nobody knew where the money had come from. Nobody knew that every ticket, reservation, and luxury package had been purchased with the value of Emily's stolen home. The more he celebrated, the deeper the betrayal felt. Emily tried focusing on work. She threw herself into meetings, client projects, and business growth. During the day she remained productive, but at night her thoughts returned to the same painful questions. How could her parents do this? How could they watch her struggle for years and still believe she deserved to lose everything? She replayed memories from childhood that suddenly looked different. She remembered birthdays when Jason received expensive gifts while she was told to be grateful for less. She remembered family vacations planned around Jason's interests. She remembered being expected to help with responsibilities while Jason escaped consequences. At the time she had accepted these differences because she loved her family. Now she saw a pattern that had existed for decades. Jason had always been protected. Emily had always been expected to sacrifice. The sale of the house wasn't an isolated event. It was simply the worst example of a lifetime of favoritism. One evening her mother called and asked if she wanted to join the family for dinner. Emily almost refused, but curiosity convinced her to attend. When she arrived, she quickly realized the gathering wasn't intended to repair relationships. It was a celebration for Jason's upcoming trip. A large map of Europe sat on the dining room table. Jason excitedly described his travel route while their parents listened proudly. He spoke about luxury train rides, expensive resorts, and five-star dining experiences. Every detail felt like another reminder of what had been taken from her. Throughout the meal, nobody acknowledged her loss. Nobody apologized. Instead, her father eventually turned to her and asked why she seemed distant. Emily stared at him in disbelief. He honestly expected her to participate in the celebration. When she calmly explained that she was still hurt, her mother immediately sighed with frustration. She said Emily needed to stop dwelling on the past. According to her, Jason finally had a chance to experience life and deserved support rather than negativity. Jason nodded in agreement and accused Emily of trying to ruin a happy moment. Emily sat silently while they criticized her reaction to their betrayal. In that moment, she realized arguing would accomplish nothing. They didn't see themselves as wrong. They saw themselves as victims of her disappointment. After dinner, she drove home feeling emotionally exhausted, yet something else had begun replacing the sadness. It was a growing sense of clarity. For years, she had ignored warning signs because she wanted to believe the best about her family. Now she was finally seeing them as they truly were. Once that illusion disappeared, other details started standing out. She remembered unusual conversations about paperwork. She remembered strange questions about legal documents. She remembered moments when her parents seemed unusually interested in her finances. The more she thought about it, the more uncomfortable she became. Something about the sale still didn't make sense. Her parents had never possessed legal authority over her property. Selling it should have been impossible, yet somehow it had happened. That question refused to leave her mind. A few days later, she contacted the attorney who had handled the original purchase of her house. She simply wanted answers. During their meeting, she learned several details that raised even more concerns. Certain documents involved in the sale appeared unusual. Some signatures looked different from the originals. Certain authorization records seemed inconsistent. The attorney couldn't make immediate conclusions, but he recommended further investigation. For the first time since losing her house, Emily felt something resembling hope. Not because she expected an easy solution, but because she finally had a direction. If her family had manipulated legal documents, they might have made mistakes. She began gathering every record she could find. Bank statements, emails, contracts, text messages, property records, and financial reports slowly filled folders on her desk. At first she worried she was overreacting. Then she discovered her first major inconsistency. One authorization document contained a signature supposedly written while she was attending an out-of-town conference. Records clearly proved she had been hundreds of miles away at the time. The realization sent a chill through her body. Someone had signed documents in her name. The deeper she looked, the more suspicious details appeared. Meanwhile, Jason continued celebrating. His vacation departure date was only weeks away, and his excitement grew daily. He purchased designer luggage, expensive clothing, and luxury accessories. Every purchase seemed designed to attract attention. He bragged online about first-class flights and exclusive experiences. Their parents proudly shared his posts with relatives. They spoke about the trip as though it were a family achievement. Emily watched quietly. She no longer felt the need to defend herself or explain her feelings. Instead, she focused on collecting information. Her silence confused her family. They expected arguments, they expected emotional confrontations. When those reactions never came, they assumed she had accepted defeat. Jason especially enjoyed mocking her calmness. During family gatherings, he made comments about learning to let things go. He joked about how some people cared too much about money. Every remark revealed how little he understood the situation. He believed the story was over. Emily knew it had barely begun. As weeks passed, her investigation uncovered increasingly troubling evidence. Financial transfers connected to the sale appeared linked to accounts controlled by her parents and Jason. Certain documents showed signs of alteration. Communication records revealed conversations they thought had been deleted. The more evidence she collected, the more confident she became. This wasn't merely a betrayal. It was potentially fraud. For years, Emily had been the responsible daughter. She had solved problems quietly, avoided conflict and forgiven mistakes. Her family still saw her that way. They believed she would eventually move on because that was what she had always done. What they failed to understand was that something fundamental had changed. Losing the house had destroyed her trust, but it had also removed her fear of disappointing them. For the first time in her life, she wasn't trying to earn their approval. That freedom made her stronger than they realized. One afternoon, her father called and asked if she would contribute money toward a special excursion Jason wanted to book during his trip. The request was so absurd that Emily almost laughed. Even after taking her house, they still expected more. She politely declined. Her father sounded offended. He accused her of holding grudges and refusing to support family. Emily ended the conversation without arguing. After hanging up, she added another note to her growing collection of evidence. Every interaction seemed to reveal a new layer of entitlement. A few days later, she received a message from a distant relative who had recently seen Jason's vacation posts. The relative congratulated Emily for helping make the trip possible. Confused, Emily asked what they meant. The relative explained that Jason and his parents had been telling family members that Emily happily supported the vacation and wanted her brother to enjoy life. Emily stared at the screen in disbelief. Not only had they taken her house, but they were rewriting the story to make themselves look generous and loving. That discovery erased any remaining doubt. She was no longer dealing with a misunderstanding. She was dealing with people willing to manipulate reality itself to protect their image. That night she sat alone in her temporary apartment, surrounded by documents, notes and folders. The room was quiet except for the sound of pages turning. She reviewed every piece of evidence she had collected. Dates matched, records aligned, patterns emerged. What had once seemed like isolated incidents now formed a clear picture. Her family had underestimated her because they always had. They believed she would absorb the damage as she always had. They believed kindness meant weakness. Looking around the room, Emily felt a calm determination she hadn't experienced before. The sadness remained, but it no longer controlled her. Something stronger had taken its place. Jason continued planning his dream vacation. Their parents continued defending their actions. The entire family believed the story was finished. None of them realized that Emily was quietly assembling the truth piece by piece. They celebrated because they thought they had won. They had no idea that every celebration brought them one step closer to a reckoning they would never see coming. And hidden inside the growing stack of documents on her desk were the first clues that would eventually change everything. As Jason's departure date drew closer, the atmosphere inside the family became even more unbearable for Emily. Every day seemed to bring a new reminder of the vacation that had been funded through the destruction of everything she had worked for. Jason spent his time shopping, posting online, and talking endlessly about the luxurious experiences waiting for him. Their parents acted like proud sponsors of some grand achievement, telling relatives how excited they were for their son to finally enjoy life. Meanwhile, Emily continued living in a temporary apartment, surrounded by boxes and paperwork, trying to rebuild a sense of stability after losing her home. Yet while her family celebrated, she was working quietly behind the scenes. Every evening after work, she reviewed documents, organized records, and spoke with professionals who helped her understand exactly what had happened. What began as suspicion had turned into certainty. The deeper she investigated, the more evidence she uncovered. There were forged signatures, unauthorized transactions, altered records, and communications that directly contradicted the story her family had been telling. Every discovery hurt because it confirmed that the betrayal was far worse than she originally believed. This wasn't a desperate mistake made in a moment of poor judgment. It was a carefully planned decision that required deception at multiple levels. Her parents and Jason had knowingly crossed lines they should never have crossed. Despite the emotional pain, Emily remained calm. She understood that anger would not fix anything. The only thing that mattered now was the truth. Her attorney was impressed by the amount of documentation she had collected. Together they reviewed every detail. They created timelines, compared signatures, examined transfers, and organized evidence into a complete case. Over time, the stack of papers grew into a thick folder filled with everything needed to expose what had happened. Looking at it, Emily often thought about how ironic the situation was. For years her family had treated her organization and responsibility as boring personality traits. Now those same traits were becoming their greatest problem, because Emily kept records. Emily saved emails. Emily documented agreements. Emily paid attention. The habits they once ignored were now protecting her. One afternoon her attorney informed her that they had enough evidence to move forward. Hearing those words brought an unexpected sense of relief. For the first time since losing her house, she felt like she was no longer powerless. The truth was no longer trapped inside her thoughts. It existed on paper. It existed in records. It existed in evidence that could not be explained away by emotional manipulation. Yet instead of immediately taking action, Emily decided to wait a little longer. Jason's farewell dinner was only a week away. Relatives from different parts of the city would attend. Her parents had planned it as a celebration before his departure. Everyone expected Emily either to stay away or quietly tolerate the evening. Nobody imagined she had plans of her own. During the days leading up to the dinner, Jason became increasingly arrogant. He talked about the trip as though it were already completed. He described luxury suites, gourmet meals, and beautiful beaches. Whenever someone mentioned Emily's situation, he dismissed it with a shrug. According to him, she would recover because she always did. Those words stayed with Emily. He wasn't entirely wrong, she always recovered. The difference this time was that recovery would not involve pretending nothing happened. Her parents were equally confident. They believed the worst was behind them. Emily's silence convinced them she had accepted reality. Her mother even called to ask if she would be willing to say a few kind words during the farewell dinner. Emily agreed without hesitation. The answer surprised her mother, who seemed delighted by what she interpreted as forgiveness. Emily simply smiled after ending the call. The evening of the dinner finally arrived. The house was filled with relatives, friends, laughter, and excitement. Decorations covered the walls. Music played softly in the background. People gathered around Jason, congratulating him and asking questions about his upcoming adventure. He loved every second of the attention. Wearing expensive new clothes purchased for the trip, he moved through the room like a celebrity. Their parents looked happier than Emily had seen them in years. As she entered carrying a simple leather folder, nobody paid much attention. They assumed it contained ordinary papers related to work. Emily greeted relatives politely and took a seat. Throughout the evening she remained quiet, listening as conversations unfolded around her. Several relatives praised Jason's good fortune. Others complimented their parents for supporting his dreams. A few even suggested that Emily should learn to enjoy life the way her brother did. She responded with polite smiles and said very little. Inside, she felt remarkably calm. Months earlier she would have been devastated. Now she simply observed. The illusion her family had created was about to collapse. Eventually dinner began. Plates were served, glasses were raised, and speeches followed. Jason spoke first. He thanked everyone for their support and described how excited he was to explore Europe. The room applauded enthusiastically. Then their father gave a speech about family unity and sacrifice. Emily found the words almost amusing. Listening to someone speak about sacrifice while ignoring everything she had sacrificed for years felt surreal. Their mother followed with an emotional speech about dreams coming true. More applause filled the room. Finally, someone suggested that Emily say a few words. The room grew quiet. All eyes turned toward her. Slowly she stood from her chair. Jason smiled confidently. Their parents looked relieved. They expected a graceful surrender. They expected gratitude, forgiveness, or perhaps a sentimental farewell. Instead, Emily picked up the leather folder she had brought and walked toward the center of the room. Her calm expression immediately captured everyone's attention. She placed the folder on the table and looked around the room. For a moment nobody spoke. Then she began. Her voice was steady and clear. She explained that before everyone celebrated Jason's vacation, there were some important facts that deserved attention. Confused expressions appeared throughout the room. Jason's smile weakened slightly. Their parents exchanged nervous glances. Emily opened the folder and removed the first set of documents. She explained that the house sold to fund the vacation had belonged entirely to her. Every payment, every mortgage installment, every maintenance expense had come from her own income. She provided records proving it. Several relatives leaned forward to examine the documents. The room became noticeably quieter. Emily then presented another set of papers. These showed inconsistencies in the sale process. Dates did not align, authorizations appeared questionable. Certain signatures had been created when she was physically located hundreds of miles away. Murmurs spread across the room. Jason's confidence disappeared completely. Their parents looked increasingly uncomfortable. Emily continued calmly. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't accusing. She was simply presenting facts. One document led to another. Financial records revealed how money from the sale had been transferred. Emails exposed conversations that contradicted public claims. Transaction histories showed movements of funds that should never have occurred. Each piece of evidence removed another layer of the story her family had built. Relatives who had arrived expecting a celebration now sat in stunned silence. Some began asking questions. Others examined the documents themselves. Emily answered calmly, allowing the evidence to speak for itself. Then came the most damaging records. These documents demonstrated direct involvement from multiple family members in actions that legal professionals considered highly questionable. The room felt frozen. Nobody knew what to say. Jason's face had become pale. Sweat appeared on his forehead. For the first time all evening he looked genuinely frightened. Their father attempted to interrupt, claiming there had been misunderstandings. Emily calmly handed another document to a relative. The explanation collapsed immediately. Her mother tried appealing to emotions, arguing that families should handle problems privately. Yet every attempt to redirect the conversation failed because the evidence was too clear. Years of manipulation suddenly stopped working. Facts were replacing excuses. As the discussion continued, Emily revealed that attorneys and financial investigators had already reviewed the material. She explained that official action was being prepared. The announcement hit the room like a thunderclap. Jason looked as though he had forgotten how to breathe. His vacation plans, which had seemed so certain only hours earlier, suddenly appeared fragile. Relatives who had spent months praising him now looked at him with disappointment and disbelief. Several people openly questioned how he could accept money connected to such actions. The admiration he enjoyed vanished before his eyes. Their parents appeared equally shocked. For years they had relied on emotional pressure to control situations. Whenever problems arose, guilt and family loyalty solved them. They never expected evidence. They never expected consequences. Most importantly, they never expected Emily to fight back. Yet here she stood, calm and prepared, holding a folder that contained the truth they had worked so hard to hide. As questions continued filling the room, the atmosphere transformed completely. What had begun as a farewell celebration had become a public exposure of betrayal. Jason no longer talked about beaches and luxury hotels. Their parents no longer spoke about family unity. The reality they created was collapsing under the weight of documented facts. Eventually, Emily closed the folder and looked around the room. She felt no joy watching their panic. She felt no satisfaction from their embarrassment. What she felt was freedom. For the first time in her life, she was no longer carrying the burden of protecting people who never protected her. She was no longer sacrificing her truth to preserve their comfort. The silence that followed was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was the sound of illusions breaking. One by one, relatives began understanding what had really happened. The daughter who had always been expected to give everything had finally reached her limit. And the family who believed they could take from her without consequence were discovering that they had made a terrible mistake. As Emily picked up the folder and prepared to leave, she noticed the fear in their eyes. It wasn't fear of her anger. It was fear of accountability. They finally understood that the story was not ending with Jason boarding a plane to Europe. It was beginning with a folder full of evidence that could change everything. And for the first time since losing her house, Emily walked away feeling stronger than every person she left behind. The days following the farewell dinner were unlike anything Emily's family had ever experienced. For years, they had controlled the narrative, shaped opinions, and relied on emotional manipulation whenever conflicts arose. Now everything had changed. The truth had escaped the walls of the family home and spread among relatives, friends, and everyone who had witnessed the shocking events of that evening. Calls began pouring in from confused family members who wanted answers. Some demanded explanations. Others expressed support for Emily. Many simply could not believe what they had learned. Jason, who only days earlier had been proudly counting down the hours until his luxury European vacation, suddenly found himself avoiding phone calls and ignoring messages. His social media accounts, once filled with excitement and confidence, became unusually quiet. The attention he had enjoyed was now working against him. People who once congratulated him were asking uncomfortable questions. His carefully crafted image was beginning to crumble. Meanwhile, Emily remained focused on the legal process. She met regularly with attorneys, financial experts, and investigators who reviewed every piece of evidence she had collected. The more professionals examined the records, the stronger her case became. Documents were verified, timelines were confirmed, and financial transfers were traced. What had started as a painful personal betrayal was now becoming a matter of legal accountability. For the first time, Emily felt that justice might actually be possible. She wasn't seeking revenge out of anger. She simply wanted the truth recognized and the damage repaired, yet even she couldn't predict how quickly events would unfold. Only a few days after the dinner, the first major blow arrived. Several financial accounts connected to the property sale became subject to review. Certain transactions were temporarily frozen while questions were investigated. The money that had funded Jason's dream vacation suddenly became inaccessible. Hotel reservations that required additional payments were cancelled. Luxury experiences he had proudly booked disappeared one after another. Airline tickets faced complications. Travel agencies requested documentation. Every day seemed to bring another problem. Jason spent hours making phone calls, desperately trying to save his plans, but there was little he could do. The funds he had depended on were no longer available. His dream vacation, which had felt so close, was slipping away. Watching events unfold, Emily felt surprisingly calm. She had imagined that seeing Jason suffer consequences might bring satisfaction, but the reality was different. The excitement she once expected simply wasn't there. Instead, she felt a quiet sense of closure. For years, Jason had been protected from the results of his choices. Someone always rescued him. Someone always fixed his mistakes. This time, reality was finally catching up. Their parents reacted with panic. Suddenly, they were no longer defending their actions with confidence. They spent their days contacting attorneys, seeking advice and searching for solutions. The certainty they displayed when they sold Emily's house had vanished completely. They now understood the seriousness of the situation. Yet even as pressure increased, they continued hoping Emily would save them. Her mother called repeatedly, leaving emotional messages about family unity and forgiveness. Her father spoke about misunderstandings and mistakes. Neither message contained the one thing Emily had hoped to hear: genuine accountability. They still wanted relief from consequences without fully accepting responsibility for causing them. Emily listened to their messages but did not respond immediately. For the first time in her life, she refused to prioritize their comfort over her own well-being. Weeks passed, and the legal investigation continued gathering momentum. More records emerged. Additional details surfaced. Questions that once seemed impossible to answer were resolved through documentation. Every discovery reinforced the same conclusion: the sale of the house had never been legitimate. Actions had been taken that should never have occurred. As the evidence grew stronger, the possibility of reversing certain transactions became increasingly realistic. News of the situation continued spreading through the extended family. Relatives who had once criticized Emily for being upset began apologizing. Many admitted they had believed the version of events presented by her parents and Jason. Others confessed that they had always noticed favoritism but never realized how severe it had become. For Emily, these conversations were both comforting and painful. It felt good to be believed, yet it hurt knowing how long she had endured unfair treatment without support. One afternoon, a cousin visited her apartment. During their conversation, the cousin shared something that stayed with Emily for days. "You know," she said softly, "everyone thought you were the strongest person in the family because you never complained. But now I realize you weren't staying quiet because you were weak. You were staying quiet because you were carrying everyone else." Those words struck deeply. Emily had spent so many years solving problems, making sacrifices, and supporting others that she had forgotten how heavy the burden truly was. Losing her house had forced her to confront a difficult truth. The people she worked hardest to help were often the people who appreciated her the least. As months passed, the consequences facing Jason became impossible to ignore. His cancelled vacation became a source of embarrassment among friends who had followed every stage of his planning. Questions about the situation followed him everywhere. Job opportunities became harder to secure. Relationships became strained. For perhaps the first time in his life, he experienced what it felt like to live without constant protection. Their parents struggled as well. The reputation they spent years building within the family suffered significant damage. Relatives became distant. Invitations became less frequent. Trust disappeared. Every gathering carried an uncomfortable tension. The people who once praised their devotion to family now questioned their judgment. Through it all, Emily continued rebuilding her own life. She expanded her business, accepted new opportunities, and focused on creating a future that no longer depended on anyone else's approval. The energy she once spent rescuing family members was redirected toward herself. Her company grew faster than ever. New clients arrived. Income increased. Slowly but surely, the stability she had lost began returning. One morning, nearly a year after the betrayal, Emily received life-changing news. The legal process had reached a major conclusion. Significant portions of the damage caused by the fraudulent sale would be corrected through court orders and settlements. While no outcome could erase everything that happened, the decision represented accountability. The system had recognized the truth. After ending the call, Emily sat quietly for several minutes. She expected celebration. Instead, she felt peace. The long fight was finally ending. Not because she had destroyed anyone, but because she no longer needed to prove what happened. The facts spoke for themselves. A few months later, Emily stood in front of a beautiful new home. It was larger than her previous house, located in a peaceful neighborhood and protected through legal structures that prevented future interference. As she walked through the front door carrying the keys, memories of her first house returned. Yet this moment felt different. The younger version of herself had viewed home ownership as proof of success. The woman standing here now understood that true security came from something deeper. It came from knowing her worth. It came from setting boundaries. It came from refusing to allow others to define her value. The new house represented more than recovery. It represented growth. News of Emily's success eventually reached her parents and Jason. By then, their circumstances looked very different. Financial difficulties continued creating challenges. Relationships remained strained, opportunities were limited. One evening, her mother called unexpectedly. Her voice sounded older and more fragile than Emily remembered. For the first time, there were no excuses, no justifications, no attempts to shift blame. She simply apologized, a real apology. She admitted they had taken Emily for granted. She admitted they had treated Jason differently. Most importantly, she admitted they believed Emily would always endure whatever burden they placed on her shoulders. Her father later offered a similar apology. Even Jason eventually reached out. He confessed that he had spent most of his life assuming someone else would solve his problems. Losing everything forced him to confront truths he had spent years avoiding. Emily listened carefully to each conversation. Forgiveness did not arrive instantly. Some wounds required time. But she found herself letting go of anger, not because they deserved it, but because carrying resentment no longer served any purpose. The greatest victory was not seeing them suffer. The greatest victory was discovering she no longer needed their validation. On a quiet evening shortly after moving into her new home, Emily sat alone on her back patio watching the sunset. The sky glowed with shades of gold and orange. Birds moved across the horizon. For the first time in years, her life felt peaceful. Nearby sat the same folder that had changed everything. The folder contained contracts, financial records, emails, statements, and evidence. Months earlier, it represented a weapon against injustice. Now it felt like a reminder of how far she had come. She opened it one final time and slowly flipped through the pages. Each document represented a painful chapter of her life, yet together they also told a story of resilience. They proved that truth mattered. They proved that strength did not require shouting. They proved that kindness and self-respect could exist together. After a few moments, she closed the folder and smiled. It wasn't the smile she gave her family on the day they revealed their betrayal. That smile had hidden heartbreak and determination. This smile was different. It came from genuine happiness. Her parents had lost trust. Jason had lost his illusion of entitlement. Justice had taken its course. But the sweetest part of the entire journey was not watching others face consequences. It was realizing she had finally freed herself from a role she had carried her entire life. She was no longer the daughter whose purpose was endless sacrifice. She was no longer responsible for fixing everyone else's mistakes. She was no longer searching for approval that might never come. She had built a future on her own terms, protected her dignity, and discovered a strength nobody could take away. As the sun disappeared below the horizon and the evening air grew cooler, Emily placed the folder inside a drawer and closed it for the last time. That chapter of her life was over. Ahead of her stood a future filled with possibility, independence, and peace. And as she looked around the home she had earned through courage, persistence, and self-respect, she understood something important. The greatest revenge had never been destroying the people who betrayed her. The greatest revenge had been succeeding without them, healing despite them, and proving that the person they underestimated was stronger than they ever imagined.